The desperate plea. The war had ended, but Zalthera was in ruins. Smoke still rose from the broken buildings, and the air smelled of ash and death. The once great alien city was now a ghost of its former self. The survivors, mostly widows and children, moved like shadows, their faces hollow, their eyes filled with fear. Captain Daniel Kane walked through the wreckage, his boots crunching against the debris. He had seen many battlefields in his time, but something about this place unsettled him. The silence, the absence of men. It was as if the entire male population had been wiped out in one brutal war. He was here as part of a relief effort, helping to rebuild, protecting what was left. But he knew the truth. This world was vulnerable. And in the galaxy, weakness was a death sentence. As he passed through the ruined market square, he noticed a group of alien women standing together, whispering. Their eyes followed him, full of curiosity and something else, something desperate. Then one of them stepped forward. She was tall, elegant, with deep violet skin and silver markings that ran along her cheeks and neck. Her long, dark hair was braided in a way that suggested nobility. Even in rags, she carried herself like a queen. Daniel stopped as she approached, her piercing golden eyes locked onto his. "Human," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I am Lady Violessa. I have a request." Daniel frowned. He had heard many desperate requests in his life. Food, medicine, transport off a dying world. He was prepared for anything, except what she said next. "Make me yours." For a moment, he thought he had misheard. "What?" "Claim me," she said, stepping closer. "Take me as your mate." Daniel's muscles tensed. He glanced around, expecting a trick. But the other widows only watched, silent, waiting. "This is some kind of joke, right?" he asked. "I don't even know you." Violessa's expression remained serious. "It is no joke. The laws of my people are clear. A widow without a protector is vulnerable. If I do not bond with a warrior, I will be taken by force." Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "Look, I'm just here to help. I'm not looking to." "If you refuse," Violessa interrupted, "another will come. A warlord, a slaver, someone who will not care for my wishes. My only hope is to stand beside a strong man, one the others will fear." Daniel didn't respond. He had been in this galaxy long enough to know she was telling the truth. Humans were an oddity here, rare, unpredictable, and dangerous. Even the most brutal alien warlords hesitated before challenging the human soldier. The reputation was earned. Still, this was insane. "You don't even know me," Daniel said. Violessa's golden eyes softened. "I know enough. You fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. You did not come here to conquer, but to protect. And that is enough." Daniel glanced at the other widows. Some nodded in silent agreement. He sighed. "What happens if I say no?" Violessa's voice became quiet. "Then in 3 days, a rival faction will come. They will take me. They will take all of us." Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked around the ruins, at the children clinging to their mothers, at the hopeless faces. He had seen what happened to planets left defenseless. And he hated it. He took a deep breath, then met Violessa's gaze. "If I do this," he said, "it won't be just for you. It'll be for all of them. I won't stand by while another world falls." For the first time, Violessa smiled. "You are stronger than you know, human." But as Daniel looked toward the horizon, he saw shadows moving in the distance. Someone was already watching, and they would not let this claim go unchallenged. A proposal beyond understanding. Daniel Kane sat by the flickering fire in what remained of the great hall of Zalthera. The once grand structure was now a battered shell, its ornate columns cracked, its glass windows shattered. The banners of the old rulers lay in tatters on the floor. Outside, the alien widows and orphan children huddled together, whispering in their strange, musical language. He hadn't answered Violessa yet. Her words still echoed in his mind. Claim me. It sounded more like a command than a request, but beneath her regal tone, there had been something else. Fear, not of him, but of what would happen if he refused. Violessa stood across from him, watching his face carefully. Her golden eyes held no deceit, no manipulation, only raw desperation hidden beneath a noble mask. You haven't spoken, she said finally. Daniel rubbed the stubble on his jaw, exhaling. I'm trying to figure out if this is some kind of trap. Her expression didn't change. It is not. You're telling me that if I don't bond with you, you'll be taken by force. Violessa nodded. Yes. And why me? You've never met me before today. She stepped closer, the firelight casting strange shadows across her violet skin. You are human. That alone makes you powerful here. Daniel scoffed. That doesn't answer my question. Violessa tilted her head, studying him. In my culture, a warrior must claim his place, or it will be taken from him. Power does not go unchallenged. My husband was once a ruler of this city. Now he is dead, and his enemies wait like scavengers to pick at his remains. She gestured toward the open doorway, where the night stretched dark and empty. In 3 days, those enemies will come. If I do not have a warrior beside me, they will seize me. They will take my people, my home, and everything I have left. Daniel frowned. So why don't you fight back? Violessa's gaze darkened. We did. The men of my world fought until none remained. The ones who survived were too old, too young, or too broken to wield a blade. Daniel felt something heavy settle in his chest. He had seen the aftermath of war before, but never like this. A city full of widows, forced to rely on a system that only recognized strength. Still, he couldn't ignore the obvious. There must be other warriors, he said. What about your own people? Why not choose one of them? Violessa hesitated. Then, with careful words, she answered, because my people are no longer strong enough. And because the name of a human carries weight that no other does. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Violessa's voice was quiet, but firm. The galaxy fears your kind. You are unpredictable, ruthless when provoked. Even the warlords hesitate before facing a human. Daniel knew she wasn't wrong. Humanity had earned its reputation in the stars, not through sheer numbers, but through sheer will. When humans fought, they didn't fight for glory. They fought to win. Still, this was a hell of a situation to be thrown into. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. And if I agree, what does that mean for me? Violessa stepped even closer. It means you are my protector, my mate. In the eyes of my people, our bond will be sacred, unbreakable. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Unbreakable. She nodded. Once a warrior claims a mate in Zaltheran culture, the bond is permanent. To reject it afterward is considered worse than dishonor. It is a betrayal of the soul. Daniel cursed under his breath. A permanent bond. That wasn't something he could take lightly. But before he could speak, Violessa lowered her voice. There is something else you should know. The fire crackled between them. If you accept, you will be challenged. Daniel frowned. Challenged. She nodded, her expression grave. The warlords who seek my hand will not accept a human taking what they believe is theirs. They will come for you. You will have to fight. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had figured as much. The galaxy was rarely a fair place. Strength was the only currency that mattered to most of these alien empires. And now, if he said yes, he would be thrown right into the middle of a war that wasn't even his. Violessa watched him carefully. If you walk away now, no one will stop you. No one will blame you. But if you stay, she took a slow breath. You must be ready to stand as my warrior, my shield, my mate. Daniel looked at her. For a long time, everything in his life had been running. Running from the past. Running from battles that left scars on his soul. Running from commitments he was too afraid to make. Now, for the first time, he found himself at a crossroads. If he left, this world would fall. These people would suffer. And Vilessa would be forced into a fate she had no choice in. But if he stayed, he would have to become something more than just a soldier. He would have to become hers. Outside, in the darkness beyond the ruins, something moved. A shadow among the stars. The warlords were already watching, waiting. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I'm going to regret this," he muttered. Then he stood up, looked Vilessa in the eye, and said, "Fine, I accept." The moment the words left his mouth, the entire hall seemed to shift. The widows gasped. The children stared in awe. Vilessa didn't move for a moment. Then softly, she smiled. And far beyond the city, in the cold black void of space, warships began to move. The challenge had been made. Now the battle would come. The war-torn past. Daniel Kane didn't sleep that night. He sat in the ruined hall, his back against a crumbling pillar, staring at the fire as it flickered and danced in the darkness. His mind raced, replaying the events of the past day. The proposal, the bond, the challenge to come. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. Vilessa had retired to her chambers after the ritual was completed, leaving Daniel alone to process what had happened. The alien widows still whispered outside, their voices drifting through the cold night air. Some were relieved. Others were afraid. Daniel couldn't blame them. By claiming Vilessa, he had painted a target on his back. The warlords wouldn't accept a human taking what they considered theirs without a fight. And that fight was coming. With a tired sigh, he pushed himself up and walked toward the large stone balcony overlooking the ruins of Zalthera. The city was barely holding together, walls broken, streets littered with debris, homes reduced to ashes. This place had been a battleground, and soon it would be one again. "You should rest." Daniel turned to see Vilessa standing at the doorway, dressed in a flowing silver robe that shimmered in the moonlight. Her golden eyes studied him, unreadable. "I'm not good at resting," Daniel muttered, leaning against the balcony. Vilessa stepped closer, standing beside him. She gazed out over her fallen city, her expression heavy with sorrow. "This was once the jewel of Zalthera," she said softly. "A city of art, music, and knowledge. A place of peace." Daniel glanced at the ruins. "Doesn't look very peaceful now." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, it does not." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel asked, "Who were they?" Vilessa turned to him. "The men," he clarified. "The warriors who fought here. Your people. What happened to them?" She hesitated. Then, with a slow breath, she answered, "They died." Daniel's jaw clenched. He had expected as much. "They were noble," she continued. "Brave. But they were also proud. When the enemy came, they refused to flee. They stood their ground, believing they could not be broken." She looked down, her voice growing quiet. But they were wrong. Daniel remained silent, letting her speak. "The warlords came with fire and steel. They did not seek conquest. They sought extermination. My people fought, but we were outnumbered, outmatched. One by one, the warriors fell, my husband among them." She clenched her fists. "He died defending this city, and I was forced to watch as everything we had built was burned to the ground." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry." Vilessa closed her eyes for a brief moment, then shook her head. "Do not be. Regret does not rebuild a city. Sorrow does not bring back the dead." Daniel studied her face. There was grief, yes, but beneath it, there was iron. She wasn't just some desperate widow begging for protection. She was a warrior in her own way, one who had survived when so many others had not. And now she was fighting in the only way she could. "I wasn't there," Daniel said. "I don't know what your people faced. But I do know this, if they had been human, they wouldn't have fought fair." Vilessa looked at him. "Fair?" Daniel nodded. "Fair fights get people killed. Humans don't fight fair. We fight to win. She considered his words, tilting her head slightly. And will you fight to win, Daniel Kane? He held her gaze. If they come for you, I'll put them in the dirt. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. Good. A sudden boom echoed through the night, making Daniel tense. He turned sharply, scanning the darkness. Then, from the far side of the ruined city, he saw fire. A war horn sounded in the distance. Violessa's expression hardened. They are here. Daniel's muscles coiled. He reached for his sidearm, the familiar weight of the plasma pistol comforting in his grip. How many? He asked. Violessa's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. A scouting party. They will test you first. If you fall, the real army will come. Daniel smirked. Let's make sure they get the message, then. Violessa turned, calling out commands in her native tongue. The alien widows and young warriors began moving quickly, preparing for battle. Makeshift defenses were raised. Weapons were handed out. Daniel rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. In the distance, the enemy war cries echoed through the ruins. The first battle for Zalthera had begun. The blood bond. The night air was thick with tension. The distant war cries of the enemy scouts echoed through the ruins of Zalthera, sending a chill through those who still lived within its crumbling walls. Fires flickered on the outskirts of the city, casting jagged shadows across the broken streets. Daniel Kane stood at the gates, his hand gripping the worn handle of his plasma rifle. His human instinct screamed at him to move, to prepare, to fight. But beside him, Violessa stood tall, unshaken. She was watching him, watching to see if her newly claimed mate was truly the warrior she needed him to be. Daniel exhaled, shaking off the weight of uncertainty. He had been in battles before, on human colonies, on alien worlds he barely remembered. He had seen death, had fought against impossible odds, had lived when others did not. But this was different. Because this time, it wasn't just about survival. This time, it was personal. Violessa stepped forward, her silver robe flowing behind her like liquid moonlight. She turned to face the gathered widows and warriors of Zalthera, what was left of her people. Tonight, we do not mourn, she said, her voice carrying over the ruins. Tonight, we do not cower. We stand. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. She gestured toward Daniel. This man, this human, has taken the bond. He stands beside me, as my warrior, as my mate. Let the warlords who lurk in the shadows hear this now. Zalthera is not theirs to claim. The murmurs grew louder. Some were uncertain. Others were hopeful. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't even been here a full day, and now he was being treated like some kind of savior. Violessa turned back to him, lowering her voice. If you are to stand with me, the bond must be sealed. Daniel frowned. We already did the ritual. Violessa studied his face carefully. The first step, yes, but our enemies will not recognize a weak claim. They must see it. They must believe it. Daniel exhaled. So what does that mean? She lifted her hand, revealing a small ceremonial dagger. The blade was curved, etched with alien markings. The hilt shimmered in the firelight. A blood bond. Daniel had heard of such things before, in human history and in alien cultures. A physical marking, a symbol of commitment. She held the dagger out to him. In the traditions of my people, she said softly, mates do not just speak their vow. They bear it. Daniel stared at the blade. He was no stranger to pain. But this wasn't about pain. It was about choice. Violessa turned her wrist upward, exposing the soft violet skin beneath. One mark for you. One for me. Daniel met her gaze. There was no pressure in her expression. No force. Only trust. He took the dagger. Without hesitation, he pressed the tip of the blade to the inside of his forearm and drew it across his skin. A thin line of red welled up, stark against the pale light of the moon. Vilessa did the same, the dark violet of her blood glistening in the fire's glow. Then, before he could second-guess himself, she took his wrist in her hands and pressed their wounds together. A shock ran through Daniel's body. The sensation was strange, not just pain, but something deeper, something binding. His vision flickered. For a split second, he felt something else. He saw memories, not his own. Vilessa's, a city before the war, golden towers stretching toward the sky. The laughter of children, the scent of alien flowers carried on the wind. Then fire, death, the screams of those she had loved, the cold emptiness of loss. Daniel inhaled sharply as the visions faded. Vilessa was breathing hard, her grip still tight on his wrist. "It is done," she whispered. Daniel pulled back, shaking his head. The connection had been brief, but it had been real. He had seen her past, felt it. Vilessa looked at him, golden eyes searching. "Now you are not just a warrior. You are part of this world." Daniel swallowed. He had never believed in fate, but something had just shifted deep in his gut. Before he could say anything, a horn blasted in the distance. The warlords had arrived. Vilessa turned toward the sound, her face set in stone. "They come to test your claim," she said, "and they will not stop until they see if you are worthy." Daniel exhaled, flexing his fingers around his weapon. Let them come. Tonight, the war would begin. A human's true strength. The night sky over Zalthera burned with the glow of enemy torches. From the ruined walls of the city, Daniel Kane could see the enemy forces gathering. They weren't a mindless horde. They moved with precision, forming disciplined ranks, their armor reflecting the crimson light of their war banners. The warlords had come, and they had brought an army. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. His body still burned from the blood bond ritual, but there was no time to dwell on the strange connection he now shared with Vilessa. He had bigger concerns, like the heavily armed warriors now marching toward the gates. Vilessa stood beside him, calm despite the storm on the horizon. "They will send their champion first," she said. "They will not attack until the challenge is settled." Daniel turned to her. "And if I lose?" She didn't look at him. "Then we all die." Daniel exhaled sharply. No pressure then. He scanned the advancing forces. The warlords hadn't sent just any army. These were Catharim mercenaries, hardened, monstrous aliens, nearly 8 feet tall, their scaled bodies thick with muscle. They had razor-sharp claws, long predatory snouts, and armor made from the bones of their enemies. At the front of their ranks, a single Catharim warrior stepped forward. He was even larger than the rest, his armor adorned with skulls and ceremonial chains. His eyes glowed an eerie yellow under his heavy brow. He carried a massive war axe, its blade humming with energy. The warlord lifted the axe and drove it into the ground, sending a shockwave through the earth. Then, in a voice like rolling thunder, he bellowed, "I am Wrathkor. I claim the widow of Zalthera. Bring me the human, and I will make his death swift." A low growl rumbled through the enemy forces. The challenge had been issued. Daniel rolled his shoulders and stepped forward. "Guess that's my cue." Vilessa grabbed his arm. He turned to her, surprised to see something unfamiliar in her golden eyes. "Concern. Do not fight like them," she said. "Do not fight with honor." Daniel smirked. "Honors for dead men." He stepped past her and descended the crumbling stone steps of the city's outer walls, walking toward the battlefield where Wrathkor waited. The alien warlord watched him approach, eyes narrowing with amusement. "You are smaller than I expected, human," Wrathkor rumbled. "Your kind is weak. You do not belong in this fight." Daniel came to a stop, a few feet away from the towering warrior. "Yeah." He cracked his knuckles. "Then why are you afraid?" Wrathkor let out a barking laugh, turning toward his men. "The human thinks he can challenge me." The Catharim warriors joined in, their guttural laughter shaking the night. Daniel didn't smile. He waited. Then, in a blur of motion, he drew his plasma pistol and fired. The first shot hit Wrathcore's knee, sending him staggering backward. The second shot grazed his shoulder. The third shot was aimed straight for his head. But before it could land, Wrathcore roared and swung his war axe, deflecting the blast. The force of the swing sent a shockwave outward, kicking up dust and debris. Daniel shielded his eyes, already moving. The K-Therim warriors were not expecting this. Honor duels in their culture were fought hand-to-hand with melee weapons. Guns were considered cowardly. Daniel didn't care. He wasn't here to fight fair. Wrathcore snarled, his knee still smoking from the plasma burn. "You dare use dishonorable weapons against me?" Daniel smirked. "I dare win." Wrathcore roared and charged. The ground shook beneath Daniel's feet as the massive alien swung his axe in a deadly arc. Daniel barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as the blade carved through stone like butter. He didn't waste a second. Still crouched, he grabbed a handful of sand and threw it into Wrathcore's face. The alien let out a furious growl, momentarily blinded. Daniel lunged forward. He drove his elbow into Wrathcore's injured knee, making the warlord stumble. Then, using all his strength, he grabbed the alien's massive arm and pulled, using Wrathcore's own momentum against him. The warlord crashed to the ground. Gasps echoed from both sides of the battlefield. Daniel climbed on top of him, gripping his plasma pistol and pressing it against the warlord's throat. Wrathcore bared his fangs, his yellow eyes blazing with fury. Daniel leaned in. "Yield." For a long moment, Wrathcore only breathed heavily. His massive chest rose and fell, his muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. Then, to everyone's shock, he laughed, a deep rumbling laugh that echoed across the battlefield. "You are not like the others," Wrathcore rumbled. "You do not fight like a fool." Daniel didn't lower his pistol. And Wrathcore's grin widened, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "And that is why I yield." The battlefield fell silent. Then, slowly, the K-Therim mercenaries knelt. Violessa watched from the city walls, her breath caught in her throat. She had known humans were unpredictable. But this, Daniel hadn't just won. He had changed the game. Wrathcore looked at Daniel with newfound respect. "You have my loyalty, human. Zal Thera is yours to protect." Daniel exhaled, lowering his gun. He had done it. But as he turned back toward Violessa, he saw the look on her face. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. More than a warrior, the battlefield was silent. A moment ago, there had been the clash of weapons, the roar of the warlord Wrathcore, the tense gasps of the alien widows watching from Zal Thera's crumbling walls. Now, there was only stillness. Daniel Kane stood over the kneeling Wrathcore, the warm glow of his plasma pistol still humming in his hand. The warlord had yielded, but the weight of 100 eyes bore down on him. This isn't over. Violessa had warned him before the battle, and now he understood why. The K-Therim warriors had followed Wrathcore into battle believing they would conquer this city. Now, their leader had submitted to a human. That wasn't something they could easily accept. Daniel took a step back, his gaze sweeping across the alien warriors, their muscular forms tense with uncertainty. He could feel the heat of their stares, their confusion, their resentment. They wanted to fight, but they didn't. Not yet. Wrathcore exhaled, still kneeling, his massive hands pressing into the dirt. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet, towering over Daniel once more. His knee was still bleeding from the plasma wound, but his posture was strong, unwavering. "You did not kill me," Wrathcore said, his deep voice carrying across the ruins. "Why?" Daniel kept his pistol raised but loosened his grip slightly. "Because I'm not here to rule over a pile of corpses." Wrathcore narrowed his yellow eyes. "Mercy is not strength." Daniel smirked. That wasn't mercy. He holstered his weapon, rolling his shoulders. That was strategy. The warlord tilted his head. Explain. Daniel crossed his arms. If I killed you, your warriors would attack. We'd fight. Some of you would die. Some of us would die. Maybe we'd win. Maybe we wouldn't. But what's the point? You came here to take this city, and now you're kneeling. The fight's already over. A murmur spread through the Catharim ranks. Vilessa stepped forward from the city gates, her silver robes flowing behind her. The firelight made her violet skin glow, her golden eyes sharp and calculating. The human is right, she said, her voice smooth yet commanding. Zalthera is broken, but it still stands. If you wish to burn it to the ground, then do so. But if you do, you will gain nothing. No wealth, no warriors, no power. She turned to Daniel. This city does not need conquerors. It needs defenders. Rathkor studied her, then looked back at Daniel. You would have us defend a world we came to claim. Daniel shrugged. That's the smart move. But if you'd rather get your skull cracked open, be my guest. A tense silence filled the space between them. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Rathkor let out a deep, rumbling laugh. You are unlike any human I have met. Daniel smirked. I get that a lot. The warlord turned to his warriors. The city stands. Zalthera remains. We will not fight for its destruction, but for its survival. A ripple of uncertainty passed through the Catharim soldiers, but slowly, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Daniel let out a slow breath. That was close. Vilessa stepped beside him. You have done something impossible, Daniel Kane. He glanced at her. What, winning? No. She watched the Catharim warriors as they slowly began to regroup. You have turned enemies into allies. Daniel sighed. Yeah, well, let's hope it sticks. The aftermath. That night, the fires of battle were replaced by the quiet hum of rebuilding. The people of Zalthera, widows, orphans, and the few remaining warriors, moved carefully among the ruins, watching the Catharim mercenaries. The tension wasn't gone. Not yet. Daniel sat by a fire, watching the flickering flames. He could still feel the sting of his wounds, the weight of what he had done settling on his shoulders. Vilessa approached, her steps quiet but purposeful. She sat beside him, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight. You do not celebrate, she said. Daniel snorted. Should I? She tilted her head. You won. For now. He leaned forward, rubbing his hands together. But things don't just end like that. The warlords will come back. Stronger, smarter. Vilessa studied him for a moment. Then she reached out, tracing the fresh blood bond mark on his forearm. Daniel tensed. You still resist this, she said softly. He sighed. I didn't come here to play hero, Vilessa. I don't do destiny. I don't do fate. I've been a soldier, a mercenary, a wanderer. That's all I know. Vilessa's touch was light but firm. And now? Daniel swallowed. And now? He had a city looking to him, a people who needed him, a bond he didn't fully understand, tied to a woman he barely knew but couldn't ignore. He exhaled. Now I guess I see where this road takes me. Vilessa smiled, a knowing, almost triumphant smile, and as the flames crackled between them, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. A human's choice. The stars stretched endlessly above Zalthera, a quiet reminder that the universe continued moving, uncaring of the struggles below. But for the people of this broken world, the future was anything but certain. Daniel Kane stood on the outer wall of the ruined city, staring at the horizon. The battle had been won, for now, but he knew better than to believe in easy victories. Warlords didn't just give up. Rathkor's submission had bought them time, nothing more. The other factions, the ones watching from the darkness, would not be so easily swayed. A storm was coming, and Daniel had a choice to make. Behind him, the city was stirring. The widows and children who had once been too afraid to hope now moved through the streets with purpose. The HFY mercenaries, once their would-be conquerors, had begun reinforcing the broken walls. It was a fragile piece, a delicate thing that could shatter at any moment. But it was something. Violessa approached, stepping onto the wall beside him. She was silent for a moment, watching him watch the stars. "You have not rested," she said finally. Daniel smirked, keeping his eyes on the horizon. "Not much of a sleeper." She studied his face. "You are thinking about leaving." Daniel exhaled, crossing his arms. "It'd be the smart move. I never asked for this." Violessa's expression didn't change, but he could feel the tension in her presence. "Yet you accepted the bond." Daniel turned to her, his blue eyes sharp. "Did I have a choice?" She didn't flinch. "There is always a choice." Daniel looked away, jaw tightening. That wasn't true. His entire life had been shaped by choices made for him, by war, by circumstance, by survival. He had never belonged anywhere, never stayed in one place long enough to care. But now, Zalthera wasn't just a battlefield. It wasn't just another war. It was a place that needed him. Violessa needed him, and that terrified him more than any enemy ever could. He sighed. "I'm not a hero, Violessa." She tilted her head. "No, you are a warrior." Daniel shook his head. "Warriors fight for causes, for people. I've spent my whole life fighting just to keep breathing." Violessa's golden eyes softened. "Then perhaps it is time you fought for something more." Her words hit harder than he expected. Daniel turned to look at her, really look at her. The firelight caught in her silver markings, the quiet strength in her posture, the way her gaze held steady, unyielding. She believed in him. And part of him hated that. Because if she was wrong, if he failed, it wouldn't just be another mission gone bad. It would be her, these people. It would be something that mattered. A sharp horn blasted in the distance, shattering the moment. Daniel's instincts kicked in instantly. He turned, scanning the dark horizon. In the distance, shadows moved against the starlit sky. Ships. A fleet. Violessa's expression darkened. They did not wait long. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Of course not. The warlords hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to finish what they started. Behind them, the city stirred, whispers of fear spreading like wildfire. The people of Zalthera had barely survived the last battle. They weren't ready for another. Daniel took a slow breath and made his choice. He turned back to Violessa. "Get everyone inside the walls. Secure the children, the injured. Put every fighter we have on those defenses." Violessa's eyes widened slightly. "You are staying." Daniel gave her a lopsided grin. "I told you, I don't do destiny. But I do hate losing." For the first time, Violessa laughed. A real laugh, short and unexpected. Then she stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. "Then fight, Daniel Kane. And if you stand, Zalthera will stand with you." Daniel exhaled. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting alone. And that made all the difference.